The last time we spoke wasn't that long ago. It was about 3 weeks just after Trump's first week. And you were quite positive about the messages coming out of the White House regarding Ukraine. Do you still feel that way after what has happened over the last week?
I'd say I'm still optimistic. I think there's several things going on, and I think a lot of it is being misread. But there are some things to be watching as well too. So first off, I think, as we knew, President Trump was going to reach out to Putin in order to try to urge him to end the war. And he's followed that up now with sending a team to meet with Russians in Saudi Arabia. There's no real surprises there. And they've had consultations with Europeans, with NATO, with Ukraine, and so on. And this is just a first meeting to see whether there's any prospects for any kind of ceasefire or what the Russians are going to say. So all that's kind of predictable. I think there was a lot of media excitement over different comments that different people said in the past week. And I think some of them were maybe just not careful enough, and the media ran with it. For example, when Pete Hegseth at the NATO meeting said that it's not realistic for Ukraine to take its territory back. That's not that different from what President Zelensky was saying in January about not being able to take the territory back militarily, but having to pursue that by other means, provided there were security guarantees for the rest of Ukraine. So that's not that different. Similarly, with NATO, he said it's not realistic to think that NATO membership would be a result of these negotiations, which I think is absolutely right, because Russia would not agree to that, and we shouldn't even be talking to Russia about that. That's not their business. So I think those comments were blown out of proportion a bit. I think J.D. Vance's speech in Munich was a political, philosophical, somewhat domestic speech, not about Ukraine or Russia or NATO or anything. Europeans are very unhappy about it because they're facing the same internal political debates in Europe as well. But it didn't really tell us anything about the administration's approach on Europe. Then people were upset about, now there's talks beginning, and does Ukraine have a seat at the table, and does Europe have a seat at the table? I have to keep telling people there isn't a table. There is President Trump picking up the phone, calling Putin, calling Zelensky, people having meetings at NATO, people having meetings in Munich. It's going to be like that. It's going to be a lot of consultation, a lot of conversations, but there's no single negotiation going on. In fact, we don't even know if it's going to be possible with the Russians. So I think people are reacting to that a little bit too. But that being said, a lot of the indicators are that President Trump is putting pressure on Russia, but also offering some carrots to Russia, like dangling G8 membership and dangling an in-person meeting, even a visit to Moscow or a visit of Putin to Washington. That seems like a reward when Russia has still not even stopped attacking Ukraine. And then there's also, this discussion about minerals in Ukraine. I think there is scope for some agreement there. That Ukraine has the mineral wealth, it has the capacity to pay for weapons, but what we've seen so far was a very unbalanced proposal, and there hasn't been any follow-up to it yet. Maybe there still will be. So there's some, and also I'd say too, the reaction of the Europeans to all of this has, I think, probably caused some recoiling of the U.S. towards Europe. Not helpful at this time. So there's some reasons to have some flashing yellow lights right now, but nothing fundamentally has been said that's actually all that different from where we were.
And in terms of the meeting in Saudi Arabia this week, what sort of angle do you think the White House is going for? I mean, they've sort of been spoken about as if it's the first stage of negotiations, but perhaps it's more of the US just kind of testing the waters and seeing what Russia has to offer and how receptive they might be to things.
Yeah, it's a great question because I know what Russia's going to do. Russia's going to show up and put out all of these issues about a global strategic agenda and all these things that they want, and try to blur the picture as much as possible. And I would hope that what the U.S. would do is put all that to one side and say, yeah, we can get there, but first you have to stop the war in Ukraine. So stop the fighting, and then we can talk about if there's any scope for other things. I hope they have the clarity to do that, but I'm not sure where they are right now. They may just be in a listening mode to say, okay, what is it that Russia is saying? And is there scope for ending the war? And is anything that they're talking about anything reasonable or anything of interest to the U.S.? And they may just be in a listening mode and then come back and report to Trump. It's really very hard to say at this stage what it is.
And so what should we be looking out for over the next couple of days then? And if there are big announcements, like how should we take them at face value, or should we take them more as a sort of a negotiating and keep in mind the kind of timeline that this is going to take?
If the past week or two has been any guide, first reports are always wrong. So I wouldn't leap to conclusions after the first things coming out of this weekend. Second, I would think it would be notable and maybe something to really think through. If they immediately move to a summit meeting between Putin and Trump without any progress or anything from Russia's side to ending the war, I think that would be a vast missed opportunity.
And just to end with, especially on Thursday and Friday, after a lot of the statements from America came out, the mood over here was very, very dire. There was almost despair in the air. Like, how concerned do you think Ukrainians should be with the direction that things are going right now?
I don't think they should overreact or be overly concerned. In fact, I thought that President Zelensky in Munich could have been suggesting things more proactively rather than reacting somewhat bitterly or negatively to the atmosphere in Munich and to President Trump, as he did later in his Meet the Press interview, which I thought was very good. But the speech in Munich was a little bit jarring too. But we have strong bipartisan support for Ukraine in the Congress. People are already putting forward legislation on how to be able to continue to support Ukraine militarily through a Lend-Lease program. The dynamics are going to be first seeing whether there's any scope possible ending the war with Russia. And if not, Trump has already said he's going to increase sanctions and be prepared to increase pressure. So there's a long way to go. And I wouldn't overreact in the short term or assume the worst. This is the first time we've had any effort to put any momentum into ending the conflict in 3 years. I think we have to see where it goes.
And sorry, just one more thing, just quickly. What does Europe need to be doing this week? Obviously, there's the summit in Paris. Do they need to assume that the US has kind of stepped out of this and assume a much bigger role, or do they need to sit back and wait and see how this pans out as well?
This is an interesting thing. I'm very glad the Europeans are meeting in Paris and talking about what contributions they can make to peace settlement in Ukraine, to security guarantees, to perhaps a European troop presence. It's exactly the kind of thing that they should be doing. It's a shame that they're doing it out of anger and fear because they think that Trump is abandoning them. They should be doing it in order to be constructive, to say, we want to see peace and security for Ukraine. Here's what we can do. Here's what we want to do to work with the U.S. to bring this about. So I think they're getting to this point for some of the wrong reasons. But if they get to that point and actually have a concept for what to do, that would be a good thing.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to see more great interviews like that, please do consider signing up and becoming a member or a subscriber. You can do that at kyivindependent.com/membership.